A joke here. All right, welcome. We're glad you're joining us. As always, we are genuinely glad if you're taking the time to watch live, and even if you're watching after the fact, we genuinely appreciate you guys tuning in. Tonight's topic is freedom failing you. It is actually just coincidental that today is Veterans Day. Did not really, that wasn't my thinking at all when I did this, but it does work. And so happy Veterans Day to any veterans that might be watching this. We do appreciate you and your service. But specifically tonight, we are not talking about veterans, although my opening is very relevant to Veterans Day. I saw an interview, this is actually a while ago, I saw this interview with a World War II veteran on Fox 13 in Tampa. He was, I think it was about 3 years ago. But he was being questioned. He's, obviously I think he was during that time, I think he was just hit 100 years old maybe. And they were celebrating his birthday. And so he kind of, was on the show, and they were talking about his experiences during World War II. And there was a point in the interview where he breaks down and starts, observing or reminiscing, really not even reminiscing, considering where the country is today and where we were at 3 years ago. He was just thinking about where we were as a country, and he said something along the lines of, people look at what they have and they don't even realize what they have. And he said, today this country is not what those men fought for.
Yeah.
It's not what they died for. And he begins to weep, and he's basically saying what we've become as a country is not what we intended when we were fighting. There was another interview. I don't actually know when this was. I didn't look that deeply into it. I just saw a clip. This is actually a British station, and another World War II vet who was there on D-Day, and he was part of the British forces, the British Allied forces that stormed the beach. And he said, what we fought for, their freedom, or he said, we fought for their freedom, but it wasn't worth it. And he said, because what our country is today is far worse than the one I grew up in. And so,
That's it, meaning England?
yeah, talking about England, yeah. And so, which is interesting to me, because we talk more in the context of the United States, and often, but I thought that quite relevant because you pastored in England for 11 years, and you saw, firsthand what the country is. And this man is observing the same country, saying this is not what it was back then. And so, the World War II generation gave birth to a generation that, essentially enjoyed the benefits, and you could even say, the spoils of a very hard-fought war. Yeah. And what the world industry became after World War II was something very different than what was happening before World War II started. Before World War II, there was a depression. There was a lot of poverty. I mean, even in the United States, it was very, very broke and broken. And a lot of people were having trouble just feeding their families. I mean, some of the stories I've heard and read of the time period during the Great Depression is actually pretty intense to think about living through that. But then post-World War II, you're talking about, like, it took some time rebuilding. Every country that was involved in the war had this period of time where it was like, we have to rebuild. People were having a hard time finding jobs, especially in the UK. A lot of buildings were destroyed. And so rebuilding was a literal thing. It wasn't just a figurative thing. But the industry picked up quickly. And all of a sudden, you just had this boom. And soldiers are returning home. These guys are starting companies. They're starting families. And there was this new generation that was birthed out of that. And we've talked a bit about this before, but it's interesting. And I, in studying for this specific podcast, I never realized how observable a pattern throughout history this is. If you do research on really any great empire, any when you study history and you become a student of history, you hear the word era a lot, or you read the word era in this era
Yeah.
or that era, or this, the era of this society or this empire, and you do your research, and there are a ton of eras that were this time period of one, people or society or tribe or something, basically conquering a land and and then reaping the fruit of that, or the
Yeah.
spoils of that, and then the generation that is birthed into that freedom
Yeah.
squanders it.
Yeah.
And you can take that from military conquests and war and stuff like that. The Roman Empire is a great example of that. The Persian Empire. You can actually just keep going and back and forward in history, but this a repeatable pattern is that the people that reap the benefit of all the hard fought portion of that squandered it in one way or another. And then you can even take that into more social or religious reformations, and there were social reforms, religious reforms, where something happened that somebody stuck their neck out. People died. People risked everything to fight for a freedom or a liberty.
Yeah.
And the people who reaped the benefit of that squandered it.
Yeah.
And then everything just kind of goes downhill. I've observed that as well on a campus university. And it's something that I remember experiencing as a teenager, because I left my parents' house at a pretty young age. And I remember I left. I got in a big old fight with my dad. I think I was like 16 or 17. I got kicked out the house, moved up north with my cousin who was living in his own house, and in Humboldt County. And these are a bunch of college students. And so now I'm like, a 17-year-old kid living in a college party house. I was free.
Yeah.
I had my own free choice. I could do whatever I wanted. I worked a job. I didn't have to pay rent. I didn't have to pay for food. I made money. I went to school. I partied. I did whatever I wanted to do. But I ended up really, really jacked up on drugs. And that was my introduction into like real drugs and real partying. And so that stuck with me for a long time and really led me down some very, messed up roads. But it's something that, like I said, you can observe throughout history over and over and over and over again. The Bible talks about Israel leaving Egypt, conquering Canaan. They have this newfound promised land. A generation is birthed after this fighting generation that won the freedom. And then the book of Judges happens. And if you're a student of the Bible, it's like the book of Judges is quite literally the worst book in the entire Bible. It's a picture of, the really deep possibility of man's depravity. And so, like I said, it just brings up a lot of interesting topics. And I'm not going to do this as a typical podcast. I'm not going to ask you a bunch of direct questions. But more what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up, I have kind of 3 points, and I'm going to kind of just mention the idea, and we're just going to hash through it. You're just going to give me your thoughts in the context of what I just said. The first is the common human tendency, like I said, is a repeatable pattern and some observable pattern that you can research and find for yourself. But when people are given freedom, or free will, is kind of what free will was the word, the phrase that led me to this topic. How easy it is for people to squander free will to the point where they are no longer the beneficiaries of freedom, but they are actually become slaves.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the first is the common human tendency. Because why is this so repeatable? What is in our nature that makes this such an easy thing to do?
That some of this will be speculation. Some of it is biblical. It's interesting when you look at the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis, especially just the first couple of chapters, first 3 or 4 chapters, it really does set the tone for the whole point of everything that has been created by God. Because you have, it's short, but still very graphic is probably the best way to describe it. Is, let there be light, and there was light, and God said it was good. So you're getting this ultimate, so God as the ultimate entity perfect in every way, eternal, and so he's. It's interesting because it all of a sudden now you've got this moment of time, the first moment of time in the beginning, and so it's it's hard to wrap your mind around because we don't really get the idea of what was before time. And so the idea, the concept of God having been around forever, not he didn't just show up and then started creating. So why all of a sudden was there this moment where time began is a real mystery because it's hard to get your head around. And so whether you're an atheist or not, the idea of the first clock tick of time is why then why. But the one thing that comes through is that it was intentional. So it was clearly intentional. God, it wasn't like all of a sudden time started and God said, "Oh, I got to catch up." I wasn't thinking about this. I didn't, like what we do when we wake up late, when we're going to catch up on time. It's not it wasn't that kind of a thing. It's like God had just decided this is the time. And so there was an intentional moment, and so you have this perfection happening, in an instant. Perfection is going into motion to where it's going to be the creation of the universe and people and everything that's in it. And so you have, the setup, the first, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so that part's not so exciting because there's nothing there. It says the earth was without form and void, and darkness covered the earth. And so you have the first moment doesn't actually make sense when you get to the next moment about let there be light, because then all of a sudden now everything is taking this real positive and productive move. But you have this moment, and so to me that speaks of the intentionality of the whole thing, that it wasn't just, God just snapped his fingers and everything came into play. God set the tone for everything with this creation of heaven and earth without form, so it's the classic, when you're building something, it always begins with preparation. An artist always begins, anything artistic begins with some sort of base, with some sort of foundation. And so you always have in the process of creation this moment where things begin that is not too fantastic, but yet it still indicates the intention, that the intention is there. And then the product afterwards is even more glorious when you see it and you understand, like people who understand music or understand art, painting, or understand, different things. When they understand these things, if you've ever seen people. I was watching there was an orchestra, and I can't remember the guy's name. He's a German guy, or Andrew something, I think his name is. And he brought this 3-year-old kid on, and he was playing. He's 3 years old, and he was playing, and he hit a few notes that were, almost all the notes actually sounded slightly off, like his fingers were slightly in the wrong place. But you look in the crowd and there are people, they're crying, older people, they're crying as they're watching this. And it's quite clear why they're crying. To me, it was anyway. I mean, I might be reading into it, but I don't think so. Is because they weren't looking at what he was doing. They were looking at the fact that he was 3 years old and what he's doing at 3 years old and what it'll be like later. And I saw another video of this same kid at 5 years old, and it was amazing. So they knew at 3 years old, this kid's going to be amazing. Even though he's still a little sloppy, he's 3, and he has the skill set, of somebody much older. And so the just the idea of this is that the potential is there. We see that. And it makes, not that I personally don't need, for anybody to convince me that the story of Genesis is true, because it's true. It's true. It was written. There's so much of it. I've been reading it for 40 something years. I've been reading the Bible again and again and again and again and again, and I always find things in it that are just blow my mind. They're just such a level of amazement that it's funny how people can have such a pre-existing prejudice against the Bible and call it stories and call it inaccurate and things like that, having never actually gave it any sort of review on their own. It just blows my mind. But anyway, so you have all this, you have this everything going on, and then you get to the let there be light. And so now here perfection is starting to touch paint to canvas, as it were, and so all of a sudden all this stuff, and the Bible makes it very clear. He says, let there be light, and it was good. Let the day be divided between day and night, and it was good. And so there's all this. So it's like, all the way along, there's this understanding that something amazing is taking place. So you have all that, it's all done. And then he puts man in the garden. So you have all this amazing, it's all amazing. The picture is kind of finished in some ways, but at least as far as the creative process of it is finished. And then he puts man in it. And it's like you have this perfect painting that's going to be now worth billions of dollars. And somebody walks by and accidentally spilled their drink on it and ruined it, completely ruined it, and which is mankind, and Eve in particular. And you look at this and you think, and because we understand that God knows everything, that he knew this was going to happen. And so you have this amazing foundational process that it's going to end up trash, and God knows it. And so that kind of answers your question, is the reason why we see this cycle of prosperity and ends up in avarice and ends up in chaos and poverty, and then starts over again. And the reason for that is because we were created like this. And this is important for us to understand. I don't know what other questions you're going to answer, so I'm not going to try to answer questions you're not asking. But the reason why we see this, and the reason why we see that in the Bible, is it is just simply establishing the framework, the reality that this is mankind. This is how mankind works. Mankind is the drink, on the beautiful canvas. And that's why in the sermon that I preached on last Wednesday, I talked about one of the difficulties that people don't understand is that no matter what you are, no matter what your level of achievement is you're still nothing more than disgusting, to God, in relationship to who God is, in relationship to what he's done, and relationship to what we've done. We're just disgusting, and so the idea of this cycle of us messing things up, really, the mystery is not how the cycle ends up with us messing it up. The mystery is, how did we ever get it going good in the first place? That really is the mystery.
Yeah, that's interesting. That was actually I was going to ask that as a follow-up question in this first kind of segment, but thinking about that idea, I've heard this said before that why did God essentially I can't remember how the question was phrased. I heard this question asked it was a Q&A session, and somebody was basically saying, if God created man with the choice to sin, isn't sin God's fault? Like him being the creator.
It's a silly question, because it's one of those things, especially at particularly at my age, having gone through an entire generation of children, my own, and now starting on a second generation of children, my grandchildren, that's the kind of questions they ask. It's a childish question to ask that, because what is at the root of this is not what is going on; it's whose fault is it?
Yeah.
Which is a childish way of looking at things, because a mature person looks for solution. An immature person looks for blame.
Yeah.
And so that's the nature of the question, because it's a silly question to ask, because why does that matter? Whose fault it is. Of course sin is God's fault. Everything is God's fault. Every single thing is God's fault, okay? Because he is the top of the food chain. And so everything by definition is his fault. The buck stops with God in every single thing. But who cares when it comes to how we live our lives, when it comes to what we do? It doesn't matter who started it. The issue is, what are we going to do about it? And that's where the problem lies. Is that, it's not, just because we don't, like I said, here's this beautiful portrait that's been spoiled by humanity, and we can, God created that. God's the one who created the cup and the wine and the person who stumbled over the canvas, so but was it a requirement that the canvas gets spoiled? No, it wasn't a requirement. It wasn't an inevitable conclusion from the standpoint that it had to go this way. It's that it would go this way. And there's a difference. There's a significant difference in understanding things that way. God created us knowing how things would go, but he also has a much longer term view as well, is what it's going to mean when we get to the other side of that. And so that's why I say it's a childish question, because it doesn't matter whose fault it is. What matters is how do we respond to it, and that really is the issue. We're gonna storm off like spoiled children, and end up being punished, because we're acting like spoiled children, or are we gonna learn from the boundaries and the precariousness of things, so that we're more careful of how we behave and the things that we do. Because yes, we do hold in our possession the ability to cause disaster. So maybe perhaps we should be thinking more about being more responsible rather than being more irresponsible and saying it doesn't really matter the disaster that I cause, even if it's my own.
I was thinking about this actually perfect flow into the second thought here, which is how choice carries with it burden, or responsibility is probably a more practical word to use. But I was thinking about this again. So just kind of clarity. The thing that kind of inspired this was I've been over the Halloween holidays and our holiday. It's actually two holidays really. It's the night before and Halloween night. So I didn't quite. I knew that there was a lot of celebration that happens the night before, but on a campus, university campus, it's a whole nother level. So I actually went to work late the Thursday before Halloween, and there was just like, it was like your typical party scene, like big old frat houses and just hundreds of students. And I was thinking about this in context of how many of these students have recently moved out of their parents' house for the first time. This is it. So now they no longer have mom and dad there, telling them, hey, this is the right, hey, you shouldn't do this, or you shouldn't do this so much, whatever their level of morality is,
right.
There's still some kind of level of, hopefully, what we could call just natural protection in parents over their kids. And so But now there's no longer mommy and daddy there
Yeah.
to tell them how to live their lives. And so I've seen, and it's very clear because you can tell how they act. You can tell from how they act, how they are taking their, desires to their lifestyle to a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Because mom and dad aren't there.
Right.
This is now, you've you've expanded your reach now. You can do
Yeah.
whatever the heck you want.
Yeah.
So it's crazy the types of things
Yeah.
that you observe on a campus. But I was thinking about how easy it is. Like it's almost like people treat their lives when they're given this level of freedom like it's a debit card with unlimited resources that somebody else manages.
I would take it. I would not quite there. I would say it's like a debit card that they don't know what the limit is, but they're going to find out.
So I was going to say it's probably more closer to
Yeah.
being a credit card that you're going to have to pay at some point.
Well,
Whether
yeah,
it's
you're going to have
you
to
swipe
pay.
it, swipe it, and
Yeah.
you're just building up consequences and payment.
Yeah, you're going to have to pay it, but I'd say your debit card one is probably a better way of describing it because you're going to get to the end.
Yeah.
You're going to get to the end, and that is humanity. That is that is humanity. You're looking at a microcosm of what humanity does. They just keep swiping until it doesn't work anymore, and at that point, now we're in trouble because you've created a momentum, that you can no longer afford.
Mm-hmm. So I guess to try and formulate this into a question, it's easier for me. I'm going to take this into more of a biblical context here in a second because there's something relevant there. But when you're just looking at life in general, and you let's just say you're talking as a grandfather, a father, ultimately, should you tarry, a great grandfather, and you have also the perspective of being a pastor, and so every area of your being is very driven towards the care of people. And you have this oversight. You have this, I don't know what the word is. People under you. It's people that are under you. That word's not coming to me.
Subordinates?
But it's not subordinates so much as people who look up to you and people you look over, watch over. Is essentially. Oversight is probably the right word. But from your perspective, and like I said, you can take this into the biblical context, but how do you advise people on paying attention to and being conscious of the fact that every decision they have, or that every decision they're making has responsibility and a burden associated with it, and a cost and consequence, and how do you drive that? How do you advise it?
Right. Yeah. So it's funny because I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Is just thinking about the idea of influence, and what's interesting is that the influence is so. I don't know exactly how to describe this. I want to try to be more general about it. But what I've found is that when you do things God's way, it makes life easier. It cuts off the highs and the lows. And so for some people that's boring because they want the highs. They want the high highs. People who are kind of emotionally driven, they want the high highs. And so the only problem or the main problem with the high highs is the high highs come with low lows. You can't have high highs by themselves, because in order to like, it's like you look at people, so people play sports and then, sports is no longer doing it for them. They have to go to extreme sports. And when you go from sports to extreme sports, the risk goes up. And so anytime you're pushing, you're always pushing the envelope, the risk goes up. And the risk means, that things happen, And so even people that are doing well in extreme sports, they spend probably more time in the hospital than most people do as well.
Yeah.
In order, because they're breaking bones and things like that, because even if you recover from a near death experience, you're still probably going to do months in the hospital from it. And so it's just the reality of how life works. But God's way does not, it's God's way is more satisfying over the long term, because you don't have the high highs, but you don't have the low lows either, and you're not having to pick up and start over again, with things, and it's funny, because I read different books by people who have a desire to be successful, and part of being successful is starting over. That you start over again. You look at people like, I could mention just right off the top of my head, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Richard Branson are three that come to mind right away, who are people that they have experienced success, but at the same time they've also experienced failure. They've experienced deep, and not just deep poverty, but near disaster. Near almost permanent bankruptcy. Because the two go hand in hand. If you're going to live like that, the two go hand in hand. And so the big question that might be thrown out there is, well, which is better? And the issue really isn't or better. Better really is defined in terms of high highs, or kind of, to bring it into the context of what we're talking about, ultimate freedom. And it really isn't ultimate freedom. You're experiencing the calm before the next storm. And so you're, if you're a positive thinking person and you're very success oriented, then you can forget the storms better. But that doesn't make them go away. It just means you forget them, and because you've got the wave, you're riding the wave, but the wave doesn't last very long, and so you have these moments where it seems like life is amazing, but then it's followed by longer periods of times where life is anything but amazing. But yet, I can say out of my own personal experience of being able to have a life that's relatively drama free is, I think, personally more desirable. For me personally, being able to, okay, you got to deal with a few little problems here and there, but it's like, yeah, you just go on and everything's fine. And, and then you have your moments of success, your moments of victory, your moments of glory, whatever you want to call it, and they last longer, and they may fade slowly over time, but they're not, it's not long before the next one comes. And so once I can get people, it's probably maybe too long of a description, but this is what I try to teach people, is learn how to enjoy long-term well-being, rather than short-term amazing success. And it's not mediocrity. You can't see it that way. We're trying to squeeze blood out of a turnip all the time, and we discover that we can't, and then we move on to the next thing, and move on to the next thing, and move on to the next thing, and there's a trail of turnips behind us that we've been squeezing, but yet God's way is you don't even need to deal with turnips at all. You just live your life. You live your life, God's destiny, His purpose for your life. You're getting to know Him. You're getting closer to Him. You're all the time learning of Him. That's why I love the Bible. I love Christianity. Christianity is definitely God's method. It's not. And I know people have different ideas of what Christianity means, but I'm talking about biblical Christianity. And it's not filled with high highs, but it's also not filled with low lows. It's a steady progression ultimately leading to an eternal uh, uh, um, I don't want to use the word success, because it's not so much that it's about success as much as an eternal joy. Yeah, that's probably a good way of putting it, is the eternal joy. And I the older I get, the more I look forward to eternity, because I've been living this life, and this life is not amazing, but it's okay. But I know that when it's all said and done, that's when life is really going to begin, and that this is only the lead up to something that is going to be ultimately amazing, but it is not going to have, it's not going to be cyclical. It's not going to have highs and lows. But the reason it's not going to have highs and lows is because, and this is what I was trying to explain about Genesis, is we've been created that the best we can do here is extremely high highs and extremely low lows, or we just make gradual progress. But eternity isn't going to have those limitations, because that limitation is flesh. You know, that God created us. We are flesh. We can live independently of God. But everyone who's in heaven is going to have no desire to live independently of God. So if you're a Christian, or you're claiming to be a Christian, and you're living independently of God, you're probably not going to be happy with what happens to you when you're in eternity, because you're not going to have that. You're not going to enter into that kind of joy or bliss. That's not going to be your reward, because it's reserved for those who have put their faith and their trust in God and are living for Him today.
So a question came up a while ago. I was trying to get some clarity on it, but apparently it was only half the question, and it was kind of related to the first part of the podcast, but still relevant now. The question is, I'm just going to ask it. They sent me a picture of it. The question is: the world was created and God and called good per God's word, but then the devil was there, who tempted Eve. Then the fall happened. How will this be avoided in heaven? Will there be no temptation to choose the flesh once we are there?
Yes, that's the idea. So because we don't choose to be flesh. We are flesh, and you know, we are making the decision here to choose not to be, to be spirit led. But those that are in heaven are going to be kind of, as it were, locked into that, because flesh is no longer going to be a choice. But that will be because so we won't be robots. This is the big thing. You could say, well, why didn't God do this from the beginning? The reason why God didn't do this from the beginning is because when we're there, we're going to know why things are the way they are in heaven, because we already have understood that by the things that were on earth. We're going to understand that, in order for heaven to not be that cyclical thing, and for for us to not ruin it, by our worldly, self-centered decisions, but we're also not, that nature is not going to, we're going to have a glorified body. It's a spiritual body. The Bible talks about this. Paul talks about the idea that the body we have now and the body we're going to have in eternity are not the same body. They're a different body, and it's right now it's flesh, but it's going to be spirit. It's a spiritual body that we're going to be having, and so that's why what I'm talking about when I talk about the experience of heaven is going to be different, because the experience of heaven is going to be combined. The experience, the Bible says, eye has not seen nor ear heard, nor has it entered into the heart of man what God has prepared for those who love Him. And so, but also on top of that, we're going to have the equipping in order to be able to live beyond that. So we're not going to live that way anymore. It's not going to be, so sin isn't going to be a choice. It's not that sin isn't going to be an option. It's not going to be a choice. And so it's say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, the idea of an option is God providing that opportunity. That's still technically there, but we're not going to choose it. because we know, we get it, and so we're not going to do that. And so this sort of, life 2.0, is going to be very, very different, because the people that are there are going to be the people who have learned, what happened, in 1.0. And so that, I think, is something that is very, very important for us to understand, especially in claiming to be a Christian. Because if you're claiming to be a Christian, but you're still living like everyone else lives, let's not even talk about the bad things. Let's just say you're living the way everybody else lives when it comes to the good things. You're still not ready for heaven. You haven't learned what makes heaven yet, because you're still chasing after the things of this life, the temporary pleasures of this life.
Okay, and then another question that came in: why is success defined by one's bank account dollars? You can be wealthy and still be broke.
So I want to. So there's two ways that this could be answered. If the question is being asked by a non-Christian, the answer is going to be different than the question being asked by a Christian. And the question can be asked by, or the statement can be made by both. Is, yeah, you can. And we're not talking about that. We're not talking about bank account. When we talk about the idea of success. I'm talking far beyond, the idea of financial, because the idea of success isn't just measure. Success really is experience, and so yes, you can be successful experientially, and it doesn't equate out to something that is monetary. You can't monetize. That's true. And so that is true, Christian or non-Christian. But the concept, of what I'm talking about when I talk about success, really needs to be divided up between what we call success in this life and what true success is according to God. And so that's the difference that makes a difference, is that, we aspire for success mostly for this life, for things of this life, experientially, to have the ultimate this life experience, where the true believer in Jesus Christ isn't living for that. He's not living for this life success experience. He's living for the next life experience. And so that means putting things on hold, and being willing to wait until some future moment. And before anybody asks the question, what if eternity isn't real? Then it doesn't matter, and whatever you've lived for today, and maybe you've experienced literally every single version of success that possibly could be on this planet, you're still going to die, and that just evaporates, and so the experience is meaningless, unless there is a life after this life. Then it's irrelevant anyway. The question doesn't bear relevance unless there's a life after this life, even if you're talking about reincarnation or whatever you're talking about. It's not relevant. But from the Christian perspective, the true Christian perspective, the ultimate experience is the next life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so third kind of segment or topic is the need for a moral standard outside yourself, because it's very clear that, like, when we are just left to do things the way we want to do them, historically they don't really turn out very good.
So I always try to think of things, outside the box, because the idea of needing an external moral standard, that's a given, and I don't think there's anybody who doesn't know that, that doesn't know that morality is, by definition, external. Morality cannot be self-defined, because morality is group oriented. It's not individual oriented. You can't have you have your morals, your way, and everybody else is allowed to have their morals.
Are you talking about well, okay. in reality, yes, right, but you know, because when you're talking about what people say, what some people say, there is a belief. The whole, what's true for you might not be true for me. It does speak to the issue of morals as well. There are things that I think are fine and okay to do. There are things you think are fine and okay to do. This is good for me. That's good for you.
But it isn't, and that's the problem.
Okay,
is
but
that,
so
is
are you
that-
talking about an issue of
yeah.
like
But
honest conscience,
it's
or
yeah, but it's deceptive, because if your morals do not, there's only God's morals when it comes right down to it. Our morals are just a subset of God's morals, no matter what they are. Whatever our morals are just a subset of God's morals.
Mm-hmm.
And so so no matter what, and this I'm just speaking reality here. I'm not talking about people's emotional the complexities of the emotional makeup of the human mind, but nobody experiences the ultimate experience of life when they're living according to their own personal morals. It doesn't happen, because your like I said, your version of morals is a subset of the ultimate morality, and the ultimate reality is the ultimate experience, which goes back. So that ties into what I said earlier. Is when you're living by the ultimate reality or ultimate morality, you cut out the highs and lows. You're not having these, amazing experiences, but you're not having these devastating experiences either, because you're living in cooperation with the way the world was created. And when you're living in cooperation with the way the world is created, if you were to do an average, okay, of the individual who lives according to their personal morality, their average, if we just call it their RMS of joy, is going to be lower. It's going to be lower than the individual who lives according to the ultimate reality, even though their highs are not really high and their lows are not really low. Their average is going to be much higher than the person who is constantly. Because here's the issue: is that anybody, and if everyone is honest in the idea of morality, when you are living according to your own morality, it's in a state of fluidity. It's in a state of flux. Your morality is always changing with circumstances in life. You say, I believe that this should be the case, and then you get burned by your liberal idea of morality, and then you move to a conservative version of morality. And that's why people, when they're younger, are always more liberal leaning about things, and then as they get older they become more conservative, because they realize as they go along in life, they realize that it's not real. You can't reap the benefits of life in an environment where everybody gets to do what they want to do. There has to be restrictions, there has to be laws, there has to be regulations, to some degree. It's not, I'm not talking about a police state, but the idea that there are natural boundaries, that when you cross those boundaries, then you experience the lows. And those lows have a way of making you think, oh, maybe this isn't a good idea. And even if you, and I out of my own personal experience, I know this as well, is that, the things that I tried, talking about people moving out of the house, and that's, when I started using the debit card, and realizing, that, oh, that was bad. That was a bad idea, but there are some gambles. Sometimes I swipe and it's a really, really good idea this time. But then the next time, it's not a good idea. And that's always the experience that you have in life, is that you might have a moment where things are amazing and you think this is great, but it never becomes a way of life. I'm going to live like this now, and I'm just going to keep swiping that, and that's going to keep working for me. That doesn't ever happen. You always have to come back down a little bit. It's never you never discover that the wow, I can get away with this. This is amazing. I can get away. Ask any criminal. And I saw a YouTube video of a guy who was doing an interview in a women's prison, and talking to women who had been who are now doing hard time in prison, because that was his thing is you think that that's typical of men, men just full of pride and doing stupid stuff, but here's women doing this kind of stuff. And almost every interview he's talking, they're people that they've done extreme things, but yet along the way, the things that have happened to them, many of them have 4 or 5 children. It was interesting how many of them had multiple children who are now growing up under the care of somebody else because they're now doing hard time in jail. And one girl's talking about how she has a 4-year-old. She's not going to see her kid again until she's 17, and so her kid's going to grow up without her. And the weight of that, because of these decisions that she's made, and swiping the debit card, trying things, and it's interesting because the things that they've done, it wasn't like, I decided I was going to be a criminal from a young age. They just started doing things and saying, why is this wrong? Why is it wrong for me to do this? And experiencing that maybe it isn't wrong, but along the way, the amount of money that's being, debited out of the card, is getting to the point to where, okay, time's up. You've exhausted it. You've used all the value of your card. And so here they are. They're, one lady, she's going to be in her 60s. She's going to get out fairly soon in her 60s. And she says, one of the first things I want to do is get a cell phone, because she was in prison during the entire time when cell phones came into existence.
Wow.
And because she was in prison from like a teenager into 50, 60, 70 years old. Like, I can't remember exactly how old she is, but it's like from 18 to on, and it's like, wow, she's missed that. She doesn't even know much about the internet. She doesn't know about she's iPads and things like that. All this stuff that's happened. The world has changed, and she spent all that time in prison. And so it's interesting to me, that you might look at that and say, well, that's the dark side of humanity. No, I don't think so. I don't think that's the dark side of humanity. I think that's just simply the more visual side of humanity. I think there are a lot of other people that they're not in prison, they're not famous or infamous or infamous, but they are just their debit card's empty, because they've spent it all already.
So Galatians, I know this is in the context of, I won't even really explain the context because it's just relevant, but in Galatians 5, Paul is talking to the church, and he tells them something very interesting. He says, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and don't be encumbered once more by the yoke of slavery." And then in verse 13, he says, "For you, brothers, were called to freedom, but do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh. Rather, serve one another in love. The entire law is fulfilled in a single decree: love your neighbor as yourself." He says quite a bit in the whole text, but I guess just kind of bring this whole thing into a practical application is why I'm bringing this up, is because there is a freedom that Jesus Christ has purchased, and it's what we preach as believers and followers of Jesus. But this context that Paul's talking about, he mentions the entire law is fulfilled in a single decree: love your neighbor as yourself. So both you have freedom, but then you have law in the same command, right? Don't let your freedom be an occasion to the flesh.
Yeah.
So it's not just do whatever feels good.
Yeah.
Right? But he says, rather, serve one another in love. The entire law, in other words, there's still a law that you have to abide by, is fulfilled in one decree. And so, I guess in way of a question, what is the freedom, and how do you practically live that out?
I had a thought that came into my mind, and this is speaking as somebody who has had a very full life. And I will go as far as to say probably a life that has been filled with more joy than any one human being deserves, and that and the freedom is to be able to live a life of mediocrity in this life while pursuing a life of abundance in the next. It's the only way that I can really, the best way I can describe it, because I'm not, I'm not wealthy, I'm not poor, I'm not successful by the standards of this world, but I'm not a failure. Um, but when I look back over my life, I literally have no regrets. There's nothing that I have done from, when I first became a Christian. I keep saying 21 because I was saved in 1983. Turned 21 in July 1983. And so just bear with me if you hear me say 20 and then say 21 and I go backwards and forwards. I was literally 20 years old, but I say 21 because that was the year I turned 21. Up till where I'm at now, which is 63 years old. And the experiences that I've had, the life that I have lived, and I'm not just cherry picking my life, it's for the most part has been fairly drama free. There have been moments of crazy drama, but what's interesting is in those moments of crazy drama, what happened during those moments? Those were usually the moments where the crazy drama actually led to an amazing experience. And so it's not, you can't beat the rap. You can't maintain. You can't just live low level. Because there's no hiding. There is a real devil. And he does come after you. But the interesting thing is that when the devil does come after me, it usually turns out to be a waste of time for him to do so, because it usually turns out to actually be something really amazing in the process. But I look at it. I look at it and I think, because I haven't focused on this world, I've never been focused on trying to make a lot of money. I've always had opportunities to make a lot of money, and as a response to those opportunities to make a lot of money, I have traded them to have a lot of time of my own discretion. So when I had opportunities where I could be making hundreds of thousands of dollars, instead I just worked 5-10 hours a week. Because then I could spend all my other time in just enjoying being alive, enjoying being saved, and helping other people to know Jesus and have a relationship with Jesus. And so, I was technically employed, but I'm talking about hours turning into dollars. That didn't happen. At pastoring, it was I could pastor, I could do my job as a pastor and put maybe 2 or 3 hours a day into being a pastor, and then I could have put 8 hours a day into making a life for myself. So to go back to the other thing that was said about I don't want to focus it on money, because it's true. It's not just all monetary, but to making a life for myself, being able to to do and be and achieve and this is and that's and the other thing. And a lot of it was and so I have these these hours to be able to do this, and I could monetize them as well, which makes life easier. But instead I chose to live on less and to have more time, and so I spent more on having time. And because of that, I've been able, in the process of just having time to enjoy life, enjoy serving God, enjoy helping other people, I've had the opportunity to, because of that desire to want to help people, it created the opportunity for me to travel the world. Because when you start to become a person who can help people, you don't limit yourself to just one area, because you think, I'm helping these people, there are more people to help, and so you go beyond that level. And so then it became a thing where I was able to travel the world. And like you said, I lived in England for 10 years, pastoring in England. I lived in Gibraltar for 5 years, pastoring in Gibraltar. I lived in Spain for just under a year, and then came back to the United States and have pastored in different cities in the United States. And during all of that, I've been able to travel all over the world to literally everywhere there are people, and be able to minister in countries where the gospel is illegal, in countries where the gospel is prominent, and everything in between. And in the process of that, I've also been able to raise 3 children who we have a great relationship today. All 3 are married. All 3 have kids. All 3 are doing well, and also been able to impact their spouses as well, because their spouses were not in the place where to enjoy what I have learned, and been able to have influence in their lives. And now they're beginning to learn that. And now the kids are beginning, my grandkids are beginning to experience that. And I'm looking at this, and it's funny because I was thinking about this just today. I was thinking, the ability to the impartation of my life into other people's lives has equated out into the people being able to live really uniquely problem-free lives. Not that there are zero problems, but nothing major. I think when I think back and I look at this, and there were some issues, there were some things, but no major self-inflicted wounds, no long-term damage because of dumb decisions. None of that kind of stuff happened because I made a decision at 20 years old that I was gonna live according to God's way, and do everything from what I learned from the Bible, and hearing preaching, but then taking that preaching into reading the Bible and compiling that into a lifestyle choice or life method. And looking back on it, I think being a billionaire would not. If I had traded lives with Elon Musk, for example, I said no. The chaos, the issues, the conflicts that he's had in his life, the problems that he's lost relationships with his children, and was divorced, and just conflicts of because of his decisions in terms of all kinds of things in life. It's like, but he's, he had the opportunity to be the richest man in the world. And so, but that's, the drama that goes with that. I don't have anywhere near, I have not had anywhere near that kind of drama in my life, because I made the decision to live according to God's way. And so God's way, it's, that idea you're talking about, freedom, that's the freedom. That Paul's talking about. He's talking, he says it is for freedom that he set us free, so we can live in freedom. I live in freedom, but that doesn't mean I can do anything that I want to do. And as a matter of fact, it means just the opposite. There are a lot of things that I can't do, but I still live in a realm of freedom, because when you are able to live within the restrictions that remove drama and conflict and problems out of your life, it is freedom. It is freedom, because you don't, freedom, in order for it to be freedom, it has to be free. And that's the thing is that, I know of people who their idea of freedom is being able to do whatever they want, and that's not freedom. That is actually, it's all it is the opportunity to learn 1,000 different ways how to live life wrong, because that's not freedom. To do what you want to do is not freedom. It's actually bondage, and that's the point that Paul's making when he says, don't, and I was thinking about that when you said it, is the, don't use your freedom as an occasion for the flesh. And I think, gosh, people read that and they think, there is a way out there that I can leverage, God's way to get what I want. And it's like, that's only one verse. That's not the whole Bible.
Yeah.
You know, and you're reading something here that he's trying to make a statement of don't go there, you know, but he's not explaining the entirety of the problem. He's only saying don't go there. Don't try to use it as an excuse for the flesh. But yet the other thing is the reality of, you know, he also says that, you know, you sow to the flesh and you'll reap corruption. You know, so you when you understand the whole Bible,
Yeah.
and I was thinking about this the other day as well, is that whole idea of, you know, people, oh, I know the Bible, you know, you've been saved for like X number of years, I know the Bible. And I watch how people live and I think, no, you don't. If you knew the Bible, you wouldn't be making the kind of decisions you're making, because the kind of decisions you're making are one-sided. You're using scripture to support something you want to do, but it's only one-sided, and it's not the right way to use the scripture. And you're leaning in a direction that's going to end up causing you trouble, because you're on an extreme. You're not living a balanced Christian life. And it's because people, after a few years of being a Christian, oh, you know, I've read the Bible, you know, I already know it. You know, as if the Bible was an ordinary book and you just read it through one time and you get most of it. And if you sit down and read it twice, well, then you probably got up to 70% now. And if you read it 3 times, oh, you're definitely somewhere around 90-something%. And you read it more than that, there's nothing more to learn from it. And how wrong you are to think that way. How absolutely wrong you are to think that way. Because if you're not living according to the precepts that you read the first time around, then you're not really going to get much the second time around, or the third, or the 15th, or the 500th. Because you still are not living according to the precepts that God had given you the first time around that you've rejected. And so it's it's funny. It's funny to me that, you know, that idea, you know, that Christianity is like, you know, 5 rules, and if you just keep them, you're good.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that about the rest of the Bible, because the very next verse is when he says, God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, he will reap in return. It's like Paul is actually in one flow of thought, bringing the whole picture into view.
But you see that, you know, you read that, and we soundbite, Christians, they soundbite the Bible so that they can live the way they want to live, and they're just doing the same thing that people who are not Christians do, and they're going to live the same kind of life that non-Christians do. There's no such thing as, you know, a non-Christian that lives a Christian life.
Yeah.
There's no such thing. You can't.
Very good. Well, that is it for tonight. We do appreciate you guys joining, watching live. If you're watching after the fact, you still can ask questions. If you like to use the comment section, you can do that. Otherwise, we do encourage folks to come. We invite you to be a part of our midweek service. Every Wednesday night, we have a service at 7 o'clock here in our church building in San Carlos, California. And so if you're in the area, we do encourage you to come and join us. We'd love to meet you. Otherwise, we will be here for another podcast next week, same time. We always do this live, and so if you're watching afterwards, your first time seeing, thanks for joining. We'd love for you to join us live and take the opportunity to ask questions during the podcast, throw some feedback, comments in there, and we'd love you to join. So we'll be here again next week. Thanks for joining.